Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
OK/X/. I'm gonna see if anyone knows what this is. Pick unrelated, by the way. My mother is a spiritual woman, believing in an afterlife and spirits living on Earth. I had never actually believed any of this until she began seeing strange things. She goes to auctions to buy for our resale business, and comes into contact with a lot of old items because of this. She says that she feels a connection with these items, one instance being that when she was cleaning a glass collection we had recently bought, she could hear an old woman thanking her for taking care of them. At one point, she had even said that she was emulating a crow she was watching, feeling and seeing what it saw. She noticed she was doing this when it lunged to eat a bug, and she snapped out of it, although these instances are not always as pleasant. On one occasion, while attending an auction, she looked up into the rafters and saw a man sitting up on one of the vents. She thought this was strange, until she saw that he had the legs of a goat, like a satyr. It saw her, and looked surprised that she could see him. He held a finger to his mouth, like a shushing gesture. She turned to ask my father if he had seen it, but when she looked again, it was gone.
The goatman is a subject I don't have much basic info about. I'm assuming we're talking about a bipedal creature with hooves, ram horns, a mix between a goat and man face, an upper torso of a man, possibly hairy, human-like arms and legs that seem goat-like. I know of 2 cases with a creature roughly described as that. The first is of a story where military personnel were at a rough little base, think tent city, and this creature sneaks into a tent of a female soldier supposedly with the intent of kidnapping her. The base is alerted. The creature flees. It is shot at several times. It gets away. The second story is of a hunter who goes off into the woods near this old abandoned home. He gets this eerie feeling as the woods go silent and hides in the brush. Suddenly he sees what he describes as a goatman cursing about people being near his territory. The hunter decided against shooting at it, and instead noped the fuck out of there. There is a possibility that the goatman could very well be the North American Satyr. If that is true, then heed my advice and just don't go near it. Don't go looking for it. Don't go antagonizing it. Just don't. Fucking with fae folk isn't worth it.
I have a story, and it's one that makes me think a lot of skinwalker encounters are bullshit, but not for the exact reason you might think. I do think skinwalkers are real, but what they are is much different than some Native American warlocks. I'll greentext my encounter, and then get into some finer details. Be me, 20. Year is 2009. On a camping trip in Ireland because I'm an outdoorsy type and the Emerald Isle is gorgeous. Everything's mostly normal. I go to bed around 10 p.m. Have a dream that night. I'm standing in a grotto. I can feel horns slowly protruding from my skull through my forehead. Goat horns. It's not painful. It really feels kind of like a building tightness. A towering satyr-like figure walks out of the trees surrounding the grotto. When I say walks out of the trees, I don't mean as if he emerged from between them. It was like he stepped right out of one of the trees. I immediately feel a sense of dread in his presence, like a kid sitting in the principal's office waiting for the principal to come back. He huffs at me, kind of like a horse. Somehow I understand his message, transfers this knowledge to me, all at once, that his children are, or were, the changelings of old folklore. Tells me that they've become corrupted, and that I should leave the place I'm camping at because his bastard children are around. His bastard children eat human flesh. Wake up in a daze. Usually my dreams are very foggy. This one was, and still is, crystal clear in my memory. It's very early in the morning, 4 a.m. or so. Sweating even though it's quite chilly out. Light up the campfire again. Hear rustling from the forest around me. I shine my flashlight between the trees and bushes, and I don't see anything. I hear a young, feminine voice call out to me from the woods. Who are you? Why are you here? I think it's just someone who lived near and I had accidentally camped on his land, or some kind of ranger. Oh, I'm... Immediately shut myself up because I remembered something I had learned on, I think, /x/recently at the time. What was that? Go on, the girl shouts back. Notice her voice is slightly different. She had a faint Irish accent when she first called out. Now her voice had a southern twang. I'm just camping here. I thought no one lived on this land. What's your name? She shouted back, angry and with an entirely different voice. She sounded like my mom. What? I shut up and put out my campfire, grabbing my shit and my flashlight. Briskly walk off the site I was camping at, taking the same trail I followed the night before to get there. It's much, much longer than it was before. Feels like I've been walking for a few hours, but the sky hasn't changed at all. I'm getting goosebumps at this point, but I keep pushing on. I hear a female voice again, asking me what my name is. Sounds like it's right behind me. Spin around on my heel. Insanely tall figure standing behind me, so tall that I was about knee height with it. In the blink of an eye, it suddenly becomes a deer. Stares at me for a second, hisses at me like a snake, and bares wolf-like teeth before bounding off into the woods. Frozen for a second in complete shock. Blink again, suddenly it's much brighter out, and when I turn around I'm just a few feet from my car. I had another dream much like the one with the Satyr man when I got back to the States. I can't remember it as vividly, but he told me that I encountered one of his bastard children and now I'm marked. I had a few minor, but related encounters afterwards. I had to move to a big city after getting back to the States for my job, and every time I leave the city to go back to the small town I grew up in to meet with family, I have weird encounters with wildlife, much like the deer with wolf teeth. An example that stands out in my memory was pulling over by the side of the road to check some text messages from my husband when I noticed there was a fawn standing partially behind a tree a short distance from my car. I stopped and stared at it for a second, and it walked out from behind the tree fully. Its hind legs looked like those of a dog's, and it had a possum-like tail. It made a bizarre chattering noise at me before it sprinted off much faster than I've seen any fawn run before. I think that skinwalkers are a misinterpretation of something wrong that happened to the Fae. The Fae are already a malevolent force and known to trick humans and cause misfortune, but based on the dream I had and the mutated animals and what was probably a shapeshifter that I encountered, I have the hypothesis that skinwalkers are the Fae warped and turned far more malevolent and evil. Once creatures that merely like to prank people, now turned into monsters that feast on people.
I had planned a 3-day trip up north for the coming spring, camping in the wilds north of the rural municipality of Canwood, Saskatchewan, Canada. We had planned this trip since Christmas. We'd assumed the snow would be completely gone, but our trail was really slushy and it was very cold. So the original 3 nights were cut to 2. We saddled up our horses and headed out. The first tip-off that this trip wouldn't be fun was our horses. My trusty old white gelding was off his rocker. He'd never been aggressive, ever, but he was wailing, bucking, and biting the moment we got onto the trail. My friend's horse, who was usually the energetic one, stayed completely silent and hung his head the whole way to the first stop. When the sun started setting, we found a patch of trees to make a pen around. We used this electrified cord that connects to a battery. Then when I unsaddled my boy and put him in the enclosure, he calmed down and grazed alongside his buddy. While I tended the horses, my friend set up the tent and noticed that my bedroll was gone, along with my hat. This made no sense, as I had tied them to my saddle earlier. So I looked around and couldn't find them near us. Then I went back to my saddle and noticed that the leather cord that tied the items down had been crudely sawed in half. I thought it had snapped along the trail. I walked up from the small valley we were in and looked around. I found my hat about 80 feet from where we had followed the trail in. I had thought it might have flown away when I was riding until I picked it up. It stank, terribly. Really, really bad. It smelled like a mix of burnt hair and rotten milk. I held it far away from me and went back to the camp. When I got there, my friend said that he left to chop wood, came back, and the boots he left outside of the tent were moved and stank too, with the same smell. By this point, we assumed a skunk was around. But it did not smell like skunk, my friend pointed out. Indeed, it was way more putrid. It was so bad we resorted to piling snow on the items just to block the stink. My friend began getting scared, wondering if an infected wolf was out there. I laughed because I knew this area well and no wolves live around there. Too many farmers with shotguns. Besides that, no animal, other than a skunk, would so thoroughly stink up the place. I thought it may have been a small animal that was sick marking its territory. I've seen coyotes do similar things, but coyotes would never come that close to human and foreign objects, but we dismissed it as harmless and went to bed. The next morning we saddled up the horses and noticed that my friend's mare was covered in leaves, but they stuck to her skin with what looked like tree sap. She got really angry when we peeled them off, even trying to bite me, as if she was protecting them. We looked around and couldn't find any sap leaking, and my horse was still clean. This was the point when my friend brought up woodland creatures' spirits and how they're known to do this. I really don't like to believe in such things, but the way that his horse had protected the leaves and was licking at the sap made me wonder. It'd be nice if it was a good omen, because my stinky hat certainly was not. My poor friend had to wear those boots too. Yuck. But we rode on and set up another camp the next night. We settled in without anything unusual happening. The horses were calm, the wind had settled, and the stench had almost gone from our stuff. But then I went to relieve myself at about 3 a.m., and before I turned behind a tree, I smelled the same rancid odor as before. I was nervous now because whatever was making that foul odor had followed us. I was really scared that it may have been a cougar that wandered too far south because of the long winter. I went back and grabbed the small hunting rifle we brought and told my friend where I was going. I went around a tree and finished my business, then got back up and looked around, gun on hip. A shadow moved slowly behind a tree about 40 or 50 feet away. I hummed lowly, hoping to hear it move or breath so I could figure out what it was. The thing perfectly echoed my melody, but it had a guttural sound to it. Okay, definitely not a cougar. But my heart began to pound as I realized that nothing could do that but a person. I yelled, "Who's there?" And then the rotting odor came back. So strong that I began to heave. My friend was calling out from the cabin for me. I kept my eyes on the tree. The thing stood behind and called out again, covering my nose. The leaves crunched and it hummed again. I was beginning to cry and back up towards the tent. The horses were letting out really low, rumbling breathing, which made me more uncomfortable because horses only do that when they're happy. And I certainly wasn't. My friend ran to my side just in time for me to keel over and vomit. He also was on the verge of sickness, but he pointed the flashlight around and yelled out into the trees. The thing ran, the leaves crunched behind it. And I kid you not, what I saw looked like a man, but with an animal's head. It was so dark, so I might be wrong. But dear God, I know what I saw. It looked like a satyr being from Greek mythology. It was about the height of a man. Its legs looked like those of a horse or goat, and its limbs were skinny, and it was hairy, especially on its head.
I don't know if I could attribute this to anything Native American related, although I do live in the Greenhorn Valley in southern Colorado. Numerous battles and other such things between the natives and the Spanish army went down around here. My friend and I are hanging out, and we decide to walk to the gas station some 2 miles away to get a drink. Have to walk down the highway. This park is the site where it is believed Chief Cuerno Verde was defeated and killed in a battle with the Spaniards. We're rounding the highway towards the gas station when we noticed that the night was completely silent. Can't hear crickets, can't hear any of the animals that are around the area. Brush it off and keep walking. At this point, we can see the big light up sign for the gas station. There's a hill in front of us between us and the gas station, so this sign appears to be resting on top of the hill. We were both looking at the sign when we saw what I can only call a creature. It's bipedal, no big deal, but it appears to be hairy all over its body like matted hair. Keep in mind all we can see is a silhouette. The biggest thing that scared me about this thing was its legs. Its knees were bending the wrong way, like a satyr or something like that. Being a teenager walking at 3 a.m. down a road with only a single streetlight, that was easily the scariest thing I've ever seen. Sprint our asses the rest of the way to the gas station, which was about half a mile. Stay there for maybe 20 minutes, catching our breath and working up the courage to start the walk back. On our way back, we noticed that the one street light on the way back to friend's house had gone out. Use our phones as lights. Along the way back, we could hear what I would describe as half-hoot, half-howl type noises, as well as strange, breathy sounds coming from bushes off the road. At some point, I swear I could hear something walking on the road behind us. Last time I ever walked around here at night.
Hey, fellas. This'll be my first thread, so forgive me if I am a little slow. Before I start my story, here's some context. I live near an abandoned psychiatric hospital and have experienced ghosts numerous times. Me and my group of friends practically grew up in this facility. It's in a small town with nothing to do, so we were always drawn towards the freedom these buildings provided us. I have plenty of stories, but I'll start with a short one. 2 friends and I made a fire pit in the woods near the psych ward. We'll call my friends Alan and Derek. Brought chairs and a table, made a really nice spot to hang out. One of our friends, Kate, who lives in the neighborhood, met us in that patch of woods for a little while as she was passing by walking her dogs. Currently daylight, Alan walks to the entrance to escort Kate to the fire pit. It's secluded and hard to find. Shooting the shit for hours, having a nice fire. It's pitch black out now. The woods are very confusing for somebody that hasn't been there before. Our friend Kate decides to leave. We send Alan to escort her out. Derek and I are sitting by the fire, and then everything goes quiet. Awkward silence for some time. Awkward silence for some time. I say it has been a while. Alan sure is taking his time. Derek agreed. I can't remember exactly what he said. We hear somebody walking towards us on the trail in the same moment. I call out, "Alan," as I see a figure looming towards us. Figure stops. Both me and Derek get a good look at it. Looked like a pale satyr. Tall legs like a deer though, clearly human upper body. In the same moment, Alan says, "What's up?" from a completely different section of the trail. Overwhelming feeling of dread falls over me and Derek. We look at each other with an understanding. Derek and I look in the direction of Alan for a split second, then back to the figure. Figure is gone. Alan walks back into the area we made completely clueless of the terror Derek and I just experienced. My group of friends has experienced so much stuff like this, but Alan is always the odd one out. These ghosts, or the supernatural, always work around him. He always conveniently misses these experiences. Maybe he is less spiritually sensitive or something. Who knows? What do you guys think? That's the only time I've seen something with a solid form.
Pretty sure this was a fever dream. Be me, 6. Laying in my comfy bed on Thursday. Had a small flu, so got out of school early and enjoyed watching Nat Geo while eating McDonald's. Last thing I see is an episode about domestication and cattle and what they were like before. Distinctly remember a shot where a big woolly sheep is glancing around and then stares directly at the camera. Pass out. Wake up hours later. Pitch black, distinct scent of sweat, and overall unpleasant humidity. I'm sweating like a pig. The covers have become super tight and uncomfortably hot. Figure the power went out. This is Florida, and storms sometimes roll in and out quickly with the power. The TV turns on by itself. Goes to scenes of lambs and sheep, except it's fast forward. Due to lighting and sheer nervousness, the TV dims out everything else in the room. Essentially, the only thing I can see is what's on the TV. Lamb and sheep running fast and doing weird shit like contorting and screaming. No sound except droning static. Try to move, only barely. Blankets are soaking wet and tight on my body. Try to scream for my dog. Sisters, mom or dad, can't seem to breathe enough air. TV pauses on screenshot of sheep looking to the side. Ah, shit. It turns to face the camera. Its face begins to retract. Eyes start bulging with its whites emerging from its sockets, and black pupils fixed on me. It opens its mouth and lets out a mixture of guttural screaming and sheep's loud baas. I scream as it gets louder and louder. When I scream, the TV turns off, sound is still there. My eyes start adjusting to the new dark. Notice at the doorway, tall figure with goat horns staring at me. See it slink into the room. Hooves, satyr legs, horned head. I cry as it approaches the bed. Shut my eyes. Feel it lean down next to me. Feel a warm tongue on my cheek. licking several times. Finally snap and try to push it away. Wake up, having put my hands on the dog, who was licking my sweat and trying to calm me down and lay with me. Room is normal, lights are on, episode has moved on, only about an hour of time had passed. Think nothing of it, move on. I'm also pretty sure I got spooked by that one animation of the sheep jumping and transforming around by that one Photoshop artist, but I can't remember if that was released on YouTube by that time or if that was way later. That still shot of the sheep is firmly placed in my brain. And I dread the day I rediscover it. Woolly sheep, green field, is staring off to the left, chewing on grass, before slowly turning to face and stare at the camera, stopping from eating, as it just looks forward at you.
I'm going to tell my Innawood story unsolicited because I know I was lucky, and if I'm right, it adds some credence to the missing 411 shit. 2005, camping by myself in Lake Louise inside Banff National Park, Canada's first and I believe biggest national park. Now this campground is on the edge of a small town inhabited 100% by employees, and gas station and clinic employees of the hotels that are in the town, but it's far enough just out of town that it feels completely isolated. The entire campground is surrounded by a 5-foot electrified fence to keep grizzly bears out, as that is an actual worry for people living in the area. I had just quit my job working in the town and had literally nowhere to live on Earth, so like the brave hobos of old, I spent my last 110 Canada bucks and rented a week in campgrounds. First night was fine, apart from the absolute freezing, rock-hard late April ground and the sub-zero nightly temperatures. Thought I was going to die that first night. Go figure, it was the only good night there. On the second night, after barely falling asleep through my clattering bones, I was awoken at about 1 a.m. There was something about a foot from my head, raising and lowering its hoof in an almost rhythmic fashion. Of course, it being so close, it was more than loud enough to wake me. This thing, with its mighty hoof, just sat directly outside the back of my tent, again, inches from where my head was, and just raised and lowered its hoof over and over, not stamping, mind you, just thump, thump, thump. Now I'm a fairly gifted empath. You're already on /x/ just indulge me here because it's true. And I could feel this thing's eyes on me, and it felt malevolent. It felt conscious that it knew what the fuck it was doing. I finally fell asleep. I can't remember if it stopped first or if my exhaustion just overcame me, but I did. I awoke the next morning and waited until the sun was fully out, because I had no clue what the hell would screw with a person like that in a completely empty campground far outside of a town of about 200 people in the middle of sub-zero night, with an electrified fence around the perimeter. My first thought was to check for any hoof prints. I checked out behind my tent, where there was a small patch of trees and a kind of little inlet before the fence. The ground was rock hard, so of course no prints I could see. I'm not a tracker. I started my fire, ate my breakfast, and went into town for some supplies. At this point, I honestly thought it was probably a moose, as I imagined a full-grown moose could possibly step over a 5-foot fence. Why it hated me I didn't care to think about, but that night, as I was reading one of Melchizedek's Flower of Life books, I didn't think that I needed to be afraid. I was still more terrified I'd freeze to death than get mauled in my sleep. 2 a.m., woken again, full panic mode, strain my ears and hear a light spring rain. Suddenly I hear it again, with more force than last night. Thump, 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 thump. No word of a lie, no shitting. There were 2 of them this time, and I legit got the concept thought in my brain that they could absolutely wreck me, and they wanted me to know it. I slowly sat up, fighting the feeling of dread as the hooves fell directly outside my tent, and for the first time I lit a candle I was given by one of my best friends before I left on the misadventure that took me here. It was a candle of St. Judas, patron saint of lost souls, and the hopeless. I lit it and a few other candles and prayed to any deities that would listen. I tried to harden my heart and my resolve. I went in and out of sleep the entire night, but I could feel their eyes on me, and I could hear the hooves fall on and off until dawn. I got maybe 2 hours of sleep the entire night. So as dawn broke and the hooves were gone, I decided, screw it, I'm going outside right now to see what the fuck that was. I opened my tent and directly in front of it, I shit you not, was a giant log. The kind you use to cut other logs on, not 5 feet in front of the entrance to my tent. I recognized it immediately, and my intuition told me it was an altar and that they wanted an offering. Grabbed my books, my now lucky candle, and some clothes and left my tent and all my other shit there and hightailed it into town to stay in my old staff accommodations for a couple days. I returned on my last day to pick up my house. My tent was undisturbed, got my shit, and went home with my tail in between my legs to live with my alcoholic mother I had kicked out of my life 7 years ago, because I had nowhere else to go, and I needed shelter after that ordeal. Few things of note. That mountain is alive or something, and a great conductor of psychic energy. Almost every time I put my head to the ground, I could feel my consciousness just expand. It felt like I was mind melding with the mountain. So, final thoughts? I firmly believe those things outside my tent were sentient, and I firmly believe they weren't human. I think what we think of as Bigfoot are just spirits, same as the shadows in the forest people bump into, or the stupid satyr things, or wendigos, or whatever it was that messed with me over those 2 nights.
Be me. I lived in historic Bucks County, Pennsylvania my whole life. Old as shit, haunted as fuck, ghosts abound. Everyone here is amateur ghost hunters, LOL. Decided one night to investigate the New Hope area, known as one of the most haunted towns in the world. Go to a Wiccan shop and ask questions like a pile of autists. Oh, hello, you witch, do you know of any haunted places you recommend? Why, hello, douchey Anon, go ahead and go to the Satanic Church up on Anon Road. She goes on to explain that there is a rumor of a devil cult in the surrounding area, and they use their old church for devilly shenanigans. It's a historic site and was a stop on the Underground Railroad. We were interested, then the witch tried to sell us some powder and a statue of some satyr or some shit. Fuck you, witch.bin. Time to blow this popsicle stand.mov. Oh, douchepeel, if you visit the graveyard and do some shit to the White Knight statue, I can't remember what right now, then you will be chased out of the graveyard by a ghost, and if it catches you, you'll die. The witch actually cackles like a witch. Whatever witch! Audis roll out, bounce. After some trouble and loss of daylight, find the road. The road looks down upon some shacks. There are lights in every one of them and some silhouettes of people in a few of them. I remember feeling like one of the silhouettes was cleaning an axe. Okay, well that's weird, but we're a pile of autists, so moving on. Reach the church. It's a little creepy looking, door boarded up, but otherwise it's in good shape. Make way to the graveyard. Immediately find White Knight statue. It's massive. Do whatever the witch told us to do. Immediately hear a noise in the woods. Start running like idiots. Everyone jumps the fence, except one, who is screaming at the top of his lungs that something has a hold of his leg. Upon investigation, he has his jeans caught on the fence. Story to tell your grandkids.jpg. After about 20 seconds of laughing. We hear a bunch of vehicles start up, muttered voices, and what appear to be torches back in the woods from the direction of the shack village. Torches. Sticks on fire, not what we Americans call flashlights. Sound of a shitload of cars on gravel. We booked it back to the car. Take off. Immediately see headlights. There are 5 or 6 trucks chasing us through the back roads of Pennsylvania that are full of dudes, most of which are riding in the bed like terrorists. Truck in front has a dude in a cloak with a cone and pyramid-shaped hood. You could just barely see him through all the headlights behind him. He's got an axe. The rest of the dudes all have the aforementioned torches. He's gaining on us. An old Mazda. This is before any of us had money. Just as we reach a clearing, all 6 trucks pull into the field and we speed off. We watch them all turn around and go back down the road as we drive away. Go to the cops. They don't believe us or ignore us and tell us to avoid trespassing or we could be arrested. Moral of the story, don't listen to witches, especially ones that cackle. They probably just wanted to scare us off, but why and from what, and why do they live in shacks? We never had the balls to go back.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.